like changes. And then we have one contradiction also, and one problem in the parliamentary democracy. I very like two quotations which are explaining this. First quotation is from Thomas Sowell, who is American author and economist. He said, "First lesson of economics is scarcity. There is not enough sources for satisfy all needs. First lesson of politics is don't respect first lesson of economics." And second quotation is from Benjamin Disraeli, who said, "What is the difference between statesman and politician?" He said, "While statesman cares about next generations, politician cares about next elections." And this is the core of the problem. Short-term priority for the populist politicians and long-term needs for necessary changes and necessary reforms. And in this regard, leadership will be important also for the future, but the real leadership. Because it is necessary to recognize the difference between a real leadership, who is statesman, who is doing necessary reforms and changes, despite of political risk to not be re-elected, and leaders who are popular because they are misusing populism, fears of the people from the changes. And we have a lot of very concrete examples. The most successful transition countries are these countries which had strong leaders who led these reforms, these changes. Poland had Balcerowicz, Czechoslovakia had Klaus at that time, Estonia had Mark Lahr, Georgia had Mikhail Saakashvili, Slovakia had Mikuláš Dzurinda. They were strong leaders who came to the real risk and who really offered change. They're hated, all of them are hated by part of the population, but they are also respected and they are leaders. Then we have, of course, also leaders like Tsipras, or I can mention also others, who are a leader regarding gaining power, to be very popular, to have power, but by way which is destroying their country, or not, at least not supporting, not providing necessary changes. Which means what it means, real leadership. And I think Professor Rosenberg mentioned these two different types of leadership, real leadership and then false leadership. Real leadership means that the politicians has to be statesmen. It is necessary to tell people through, even if it is unpleasant through, but it is necessary to push for necessary reforms, necessary changes, but also what is very important, it is necessary to give people hope, to give them belief for better future, which means to lead them. If there was discussion before in the previous panel, if it is important to listen people, yes, of course, it is important to listen, but much more important is to lead people. Which means in this regard, I strongly believe that key importance, and for the future it will be the same, is political leadership. If I'm asked in any country, what was the main reason, main precondition for Slovakian reform success, my answer is this one word, leadership, political leadership. And if I may conclude by saying not only leadership, but also ownership, what I mean by ownership of reforms. It is very connected with the leadership. And I will put examples what I mean by this. Ownership of reforms means that these politicians, these leaders, these statesmen have to implement and impose and communicate, of course, these reforms, not because pressure from the outside, but because they are convinced that it is good for their country, for future of the country and country people. And one very good example of this is countries like Estonia, Georgia, Latvia, Slovakia. We did, in many cases, I can give you concrete examples, reforms which were rejected by International Monetary Fund and also by World Bank because they said us, oh, don't do it, it is too radical. It is very risky, don't do it. We did it in all these countries, tax reform, other reforms, and it worked. On the opposite side, we have now, for instance, Greece, which did reforms in the last 4 years only because it was pressure from outside. Troika is hated, reforms were rejected, politicians who imposed them, but only because the pressure from outside are these politicians failed, and we have situations which we have.
Thank you very much. And once we stay with the politicians, may I ask Prime Minister Bielecki for his opinion?
Thank you. Well, Professor Koźmiński, let me explain very clearly that contrary to my neighbor on the right, Ivan Miklas, I'm not a politician. And I don't have this political perspective on the leadership. However, I look at it much more from the business side. And the big change which is observed these days is that with due respect to the skills of imposing the people or employees your will and clear objectives and targets and whatever, these days I think more and more important is an ability to listen. And the ability to listen is something what the genuine politicians are very short of. And because the whole revolution in communication is making life much more complicated for the business leaders, and how they could listen, how they could respond, how could they communicate and be understood, presenting so-called clear point of view with a clear message is extremely important, because the days of authoritarian management styles are gone for me, are definitely gone. Then if you are too strong leader with very clear objectives, then very shortly you can learn that you went two big steps forward, but your employees are not smart enough to follow you, which brings me back to the old days of PRL in Poland, or the Poland before 1989, when the secretary first of the Communist Party was delivering a speech about great achievements produced by the country under the strong leadership of the Communist Party. And the secretary, the first, said, well, and few months ago, our country, our nation, was on the edge of precipice. But under the strong leadership of our party, we made two big steps forward. So, yes, okay. And then we have a beautiful failure, and that brings us back to a very well-known tradition of Poland. The most beautiful is failure. If you fail, then even the public will love you. But sometimes that big step forward, which brings you down to this precipice, yeah, is not just one, but two steps too much. So this is my observation number one. Observation number two is what you professors said in the opening comment, and regards democracy, because the style, the management style, or the leadership, particularly of the country, which Ivan Miklas eloquently described, is much more difficult in terms of democracy. So when you introduce democracy and market, it's much more complicated than if you look for authoritarian management style or leadership style. And not later, but just a day ago, I had the pleasure to participate in an interesting debate at the Warsaw University, when one of the professors advised the public that the best reformist country and the country to follow for us, for Poland, also including healthcare system really functioning in this country, contrary to Poland, is Singapore. And this is, I would say, a horrible mistake to use the case of Singapore, firstly as a democratic country, which was never the case, and 30 years of regime of Lee Kuan Yew is a best example. And secondly, maybe the healthcare system is fantastic. However, the Gini coefficient for Singapore recently is close to 50, which brings us to the level of Brazil and countries with the huge social stratification. So neither is a good example for public participation nor for more equal system we try to develop under